Welcome to this comprehensive journey through the history of Wyoming, the Equality State. Over the next hour, we'll explore how this vast, rugged land transformed from an ancient seabed to the least populous but perhaps most fiercely independent state in America. We'll meet native peoples who called these lands home for millennia, mountain men who trapped beaver in pristine wilderness, pioneers who crossed these plains seeking new lives, cowboys who drove cattle across endless grasslands, and the remarkable women who made Wyoming the first place in America where women could vote. This is a story of survival, determination, and the enduring spirit of the American West. Part 1. The Ancient Land. Long before Wyoming became a state, before humans set foot on these lands, this region tells a geological story spanning hundreds of millions of years. During the Paleozoic Era, much of Wyoming lay beneath ancient seas. These waters deposited layers of sediment that would eventually become the limestone and sandstone formations we see today. The Laramide Orogeny, beginning about 70 million years ago, thrust the Rocky Mountains skyward, creating the dramatic landscapes that define Wyoming today. The Tetons, among the youngest mountains in North America, at just 10 million years old, erupted from the earth in a geological instant. Their jagged peaks, never worn smooth by ancient glaciers like their older neighbors. During the age of dinosaurs, Wyoming was a very different place. The Morrison Formation, exposed throughout the state, has yielded some of the most significant dinosaur discoveries in history. In 1877, the Bone Wars between paleontologists Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope brought Wyoming to the forefront of paleontology. Near Como Bluff, they discovered Allosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Apatosaurus, forever linking Wyoming to our prehistoric past. As the climate changed and ice ages came and went, Wyoming became home to mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. These megafauna roamed the land until about 10,000 years ago when the first humans arrived, marking the beginning of Wyoming's human story. Part 2. The First Peoples. The first humans to enter Wyoming were Paleo-Indians, arriving perhaps 13,000 years ago as the last ice age retreated. These early peoples were nomadic hunters, following herds of now extinct megafauna across the landscape. Archaeological sites, like the Colby Mammoth Kill site in northern Wyoming, show evidence of these early hunters taking down massive prey with stone-tipped spears. As the climate warmed and the megafauna disappeared, native peoples adapted to hunting smaller game and gathering plants. The Archaic period, lasting from about 8000 BCE to 8500 BCE, saw the development of more sophisticated tools and seasonal migration patterns. People began using the vast basins for winter camps and the mountains for summer hunting. By the time of European contacts, numerous Native American tribes called Wyoming home or used it as hunting grounds. The Eastern Shoshone, or Shoshone, inhabited much of western Wyoming. They were skilled horsemen who had acquired horses from Spanish colonists by the 1700s, revolutionizing their culture and hunting practices. Chief Washakie, born around 1798, would become one of the most influential Native American leaders in Wyoming's history, skillfully navigating the tumultuous period of American expansion while protecting his people's interests. The Arapaho, Cheyenne, Lakota Sioux, and Crow also had strong presences in Wyoming. The Crow controlled much of northern Wyoming and Montana, while the Cheyenne and Arapaho often allied together, inhabiting the plains of eastern Wyoming. The Lakota Sioux, particularly powerful in the late 1800s, used the Powder River Basin as crucial hunting territory. These tribes didn't simply survive in Wyoming, they thrived, developing complex societies, trade networks, and spiritual connections to the land. The medicine wheel in the Bighorn Mountains, a sacred site possibly 1,000 years old, demonstrates the deep spiritual significance of Wyoming's landscapes to Native peoples. Their histories, often passed down through oral tradition, speak of generations living in harmony with this challenging but bountiful land. Part 3: The Era of Exploration and Fur Trade. The first Europeans to glimpse Wyoming were likely French Canadian fur trappers in the mid 1700s, though their visits left little historical record. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 brought Wyoming under American control, at least on paper, though the vast wilderness remained largely unknown to Americans. John Coulter, a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, became the first known American to explore Wyoming when he left the expedition in 1806 to trap beaver. His tales of a land of fire and brimstone in what is now Yellowstone were dismissed as delirium, earning the area the mocking name Coulter's Hell. Yet his explorations opened the door for the mountain men who would follow. The 1820s through 1840s marked the height of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. Men like Jim Bridger, Jedediah Smith, Thomas Fitzpatrick, and William Sublette became legends, exploring every valley and mountain pass in search of beaver pelts. These weren't just rugged individualists, they were the first entrepreneurs of Wyoming, working for or establishing companies like the Rocky Mountain Fur Company and the American Fur Company. The annual rendezvous, held at various Wyoming locations, including the Green River Valley, became the stuff of legend. For a few weeks each summer, trappers, Native Americans, and traders would gather to trade furs, resupply, and engage in contests of skill and strength. These gatherings were crucial for economic exchange and cultural interaction, creating the first multicultural gatherings in Wyoming's history. Jim Bridger, perhaps the most famous mountain man, established Fort Bridger in 1843 in southwestern Wyoming. He could neither read nor write, but his knowledge of the land was encyclopedic. Bridger's stories and guidance would prove invaluable to the waves of emigrants who would soon cross Wyoming. The fur trade era was brief but transformative. These mountain men mapped the land, established the first trading posts, and created the trails that would soon carry hundreds of thousands of Americans westward. They also brought change to Native American societies, introducing trade goods, diseases, and the beginning of conflicts that would escalate in coming decades. Part 4: The Great Migration, Oregon, California, and Mormon Trails. As beaver populations dwindled and silk replaced beaver felt in hat fashion, the fur trade collapsed in the 1840s. But the mountain men had blazed trails that would soon carry one of the greatest migrations in human history. Between 1841 and 1869, over 400,000 emigrants crossed Wyoming on their way to new lives in the West. The Oregon Trail, stretching over 2,000 miles from Missouri to Oregon, crossed the entire breadth of Wyoming. Entering near present-day Torrington, the trail followed the North Platte River west, passed by Fort Laramie, crossed the Continental Divide at South Pass, and exited Wyoming near Fort Bridger. For these emigrants, Wyoming was both an obstacle to overcome and a lifeline. providing water, grass for livestock, and landmarks to guide their way. Fort Laramie, originally established as Fort William in 1834 as a fur trading post, became the most important stopping point on the Oregon Trail. In 1849, the U.S. Army purchased and expanded it, making it a crucial military post and resupply point. Here, emigrants could repair wagons, trade worn oxen for fresh animals, and receive news from those traveling in the opposite direction. Independence Rock, dubbed the Great Register of the Desert, became one of the trail's most famous landmarks. Thousands carved their names into this granite dome, creating a historical record still visible today. Reaching Independence Rock by July 4th meant emigrants were on schedule to cross the mountains before winter snows. The California Gold Rush of 1849 brought a flood of fortune seekers through Wyoming. These 49ers were often better supplied but less prepared than Oregon emigrants. Their single-minded focus on reaching the gold fields led to abandoned supplies littering the trail, earning one stretch the name 40-Mile Desert. The Mormon Trail, established in 1847, largely paralleled the Oregon Trail, but often on the opposite bank of the Platte River. Brigham Young led the first group of Mormon pioneers through Wyoming to establish their Zion in Utah. The Mormons were perhaps the most organized emigrants, creating a system of ferries, supply stations, and even handcart companies for those too poor to afford wagons. The handcart disasters of 1856, when the Willie and Martin handcart companies were caught by early Wyoming snows, resulted in over 200 deaths, the greatest single disaster in the history of westward migration. The tragedy occurred near Devil's Gate and Martin's Cove, where memorials now commemorate those who perished. These trails brought profound change to Wyoming. The constant stream of emigrants depleted game, overgrazed grasslands, and brought diseases that devastated native populations. Tensions rose as native peoples saw their lands transformed and their way of life threatened. The trails also established the routes that would later be followed by the Transcontinental Railroad and interstate highways. Part 5: Military Presence and Indian Wars. As emigrant traffic increased, so did conflicts between settlers and Native Americans. The U.S. Army established a series of forts across Wyoming to protect the trails and eventually to force Native peoples onto reservations. Fort Laramie hosted the 1851 Treaty Council, one of the largest gatherings of Plains Indians ever assembled. Nearly 10,000 Native Americans from multiple tribes met with U.S. officials to establish territorial boundaries and ensure safe passage for emigrants. The treaty was broken almost immediately as the discovery of gold and continued westward expansion made its provisions impossible to maintain. The 1860s brought intensified conflict. Red Cloud's War, 1866-1868, was fought over the Army's attempt to build and maintain forts along the Bozeman Trail, which cut through the Powder River Basin, the last great hunting grounds of the Northern Plains tribes. The Fetterman Massacre of December 21st, 1866, near Fort Phil Kearny, saw Captain William Fetterman and 80 soldiers killed by a force of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. It was the Army's worst defeat in the Plains Wars until the Battle of Little Bighorn a decade later. Red Cloud's War ended with the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, a rare military victory for Native Americans. The Army abandoned its forts along the Bozeman Trail, which native warriors promptly burned. However, this victory was short-lived, as the discovery of gold in the Black Hills and continued American expansion soon violated this treaty as well. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 in Colorado drove many Cheyenne and Arapaho into Wyoming, where they joined forces with the Lakota. The violence escalated through the 1860s and 1870s, with raids and counter-raids creating a cycle of retaliation. Chief Washakie of the Eastern Shoshone chose a different path, allying with the United States and providing scouts for the Army. His decision, controversial among some native peoples, secured the Wind River Reservation for his people in 1868, the only reservation in Wyoming. Washakie's strategic alliance allowed the Shoshone to maintain some autonomy and remain in their ancestral lands. The Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, though occurring in Montana, had significant Wyoming connections. Many of the native warriors had been living in Wyoming, and the Army campaigns that followed swept through Wyoming's Powder River country. The aftermath saw increased military pressure that eventually forced most native peoples onto reservations. Part 6. The Railroad Transforms Wyoming. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad through Wyoming in 1868 to 1869 marked the beginning of modern Wyoming. The Union Pacific Railroad, building west from Omaha, entered Wyoming Territory in 1867, forever changing the landscape and society. Cheyenne, established in July 1867, grew from empty prairie to a city of 4,000 within months, earning it the nickname Magic City of the Plains. As the railroad construction headquarters, Cheyenne attracted a wild mix of workers, merchants, gamblers, and prostitutes. The lawlessness became so extreme that vigilante committees formed to maintain order, hanging or driving out the worst criminals. The railroad camps, called Hell on Wheels, moved across Wyoming as construction progressed. Laramide, Rawlins, Green River, and Evanston all began as these temporary camps, some evolving into permanent towns, while others vanished entirely. Each camp was a chaotic mix of saloons, gambling halls, and brothels, with violence and lawlessness the norm. The railroad brought immediate economic benefits. Coal deposits, previously worthless, became valuable as fuel for locomotives. The town of Rock Springs grew around coal mines that employed hundreds of workers. The railroad also made large-scale cattle ranching feasible by providing a way to ship beef to eastern markets. The workforce building the railroad was remarkably diverse. Irish immigrants, Civil War veterans, African Americans, and Chinese workers labored side by side, though not always harmoniously. Chinese workers, who made up a significant portion of the workforce, faced particular discrimination. The Rock Springs Massacre of 1885, where white miners killed 28 Chinese miners and drove hundreds from town, remains one of the darkest chapters in Wyoming's history. The driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory, Utah, on May 10, 1869, connected Wyoming to both coasts. The journey from coast to coast, which had taken months, now took days. Wyoming was no longer an obstacle to cross, but a destination in itself. Part 7. Wyoming Territory and the Path to Statehood. Wyoming Territory was officially organized on July 25, 1868, carved from parts of Dakota, Utah, and Idaho territories. President Ulysses S. Grant appointed John A. Campbell as the first territorial governor. The territorial capital was established in Cheyenne, which remains the capital today. The territorial government faced immediate challenges. With a tiny population spread across a vast area, maintaining law and order was difficult. The territory's early years were marked by conflicts between cattle barons and homesteaders, tensions between different ethnic groups, and the struggle to establish legitimate governmental authority. On December 10th, 1869, Wyoming's territorial legislature passed a law granting women the right to vote, making Wyoming the first government in the world to grant women unrestricted voting rights. This revolutionary act wasn't necessarily born from progressive idealism. Legislators hoped it would attract more women to the territory, civilizing the rough frontier society and encouraging family settlement. Whatever the motivation, Wyoming women embraced their new rights enthusiastically. Esther Hobart Morris became the first woman justice of the peace in 1870 in South Pass City. Louisa Swain of Laramie became the first woman to cast a ballot in a general election on September 6th, 1870. Wyoming women also served on juries, another first in American history. When some criticized these developments, Wyoming's response was characteristically defiant. The territory would keep its revolutionary approach to women's rights. The 1870s and 1880s saw Wyoming's development as a cattle kingdom. The open range, with its nutritious native grasses, proved ideal for raising cattle. Cattle barons like Alexander Swan and Francis E. Warren built enormous ranches, some encompassing hundreds of thousands of acres. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association, formed in 1873, became one of the most powerful organizations in the territory, effectively controlling the territorial legislature. The romantic image of the cowboy was born on Wyoming's ranges. These men, many of them former Civil War soldiers or African American freedmen, drove cattle from Texas to Wyoming and worked the vast ranches. The cowboy's life was far from romantic. It involved long hours, dangerous work, and modest pay, but the mythology surrounding it would become central to Wyoming's identity. As the territory developed, tensions grew between established cattle barons and newcomers. The introduction of barbed wire in the 1880s allowed homesteaders to fence off land previously used as open range. Small ranchers were accused of rustling cattle from the large operations, while the cattle barons were accused of using their power to drive out legitimate competitors. Part 8. The Johnson County War. The tensions between large and small ranchers exploded into violence in the Johnson County War of 1892, one of the most dramatic events in Wyoming's history. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association, frustrated by what they saw as rampant cattle rustling and a legal system unwilling to prosecute thieves, decided to take matters into their own hands. In April 1892, a group of cattle barons hired 50 gunmen, many from Texas, and invaded Johnson County with a death list of alleged rustlers and their sympathizers. The invaders, traveling by special train to Casper and then north by horseback, first attacked the Casey Ranch, killing Nick Ray and Nate Champion, who were accused of rustling. Champion's death became legendary. Surrounded and alone, he held off the invaders for hours while writing in his journal, documenting his last stand. His final entry read, "The house is all fired. Goodbye, boys, if I never see you again." He was shot down as he tried to escape the burning cabin. News of the invasion spread quickly, and the citizens of Buffalo and surrounding areas formed their own army of around 200 men to confront the invaders. The invaders fortified themselves at the TA Ranch, where they were besieged for 2 days. The situation was only resolved when President Benjamin Harrison, at the request of Wyoming senators, ordered the 6th Cavalry from Fort McKinney to intervene. The invaders were arrested but never brought to trial. Their powerful connections and deep pockets ensured that the case was delayed and eventually dismissed. No one was ever punished for the killings, leaving a bitter legacy of injustice. The Johnson County War had lasting effects on Wyoming. It demonstrated the dangers of concentrated power and vigilante justice. It also marked the beginning of the end for the open range cattle industry, as homesteaders and small ranchers gained political power and the large cattle baron's influence waned. Part 9: Statehood and Early State History. Wyoming became the 44th state on July 10, 1890. The path to statehood hadn't been smooth. Congress was reluctant to admit a territory with such a small population, only about 62,000 people. There were also concerns about Wyoming's insistence on maintaining women's suffrage. Some congressmen argued that Wyoming should be forced to repeal women's voting rights as a condition of statehood. Wyoming's response was characteristically defiant. The territorial legislature sent word to Washington: "We will remain out of the Union 100 years rather than come in without the women." This stance earned Wyoming its nickname, the Equality State. The state's Great Seal, designed by Territorial Governor John Wesley Hoyt, featured a woman holding a banner proclaiming equal rights, making Wyoming's commitment to women's suffrage a permanent part of its identity. The state motto, Equal Rights, remains unique among state mottos. Francis E. Warren, Wyoming's last territorial governor, became its first state governor, though he served only briefly before being elected to the U.S. Senate, where he would serve for 37 years and become one of the most powerful politicians in Washington. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne is named in his honor. The 1890s brought economic challenges. The Panic of 1893 caused cattle prices to collapse, and a series of harsh winters, particularly the winter of 1886, 1887, devastated the cattle industry. Known as the Great Die-Up, this winter killed hundreds of thousands of cattle across the plains, with some ranchers losing 90% of their herds. The cattle industry's collapse forced diversification. Sheep ranching increased, though this led to violent conflicts between cattle and sheep ranchers, including the infamous Spring Creek Raid of 1909, where 3 sheep herders were murdered. Mining became increasingly important, with coal, oil, and various minerals contributing to the economy. Part 10: The Energy State emerges. The 20th century transformed Wyoming into America's energy powerhouse. Oil was first discovered in Wyoming in 1883, but the Salt Creek oil field, discovered in 1908 north of Casper, launched Wyoming's oil boom. By the 1920s, Wyoming was one of the nation's leading oil producers. Teapot Dome, an oil field near Salt Creek, became the center of one of America's greatest political scandals in the 1920s. Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall secretly leased the naval oil reserves at Teapot Dome to private oil companies in exchange for bribes. The scandal rocked President Warren G. Harding's administration and led to Fall becoming the first cabinet member in American history to be imprisoned for crimes committed while in office. Coal mining expanded dramatically with the development of surface mining in the Powder River Basin. By the late 20th century, Wyoming produced more coal than any other state. with massive operations near Gillette, producing hundreds of millions of tons annually. The coal-powered electrical plants across the nation, earning Wyoming the nickname Energy Capital of the Nation. Natural gas discoveries added another dimension to Wyoming's energy portfolio. The Jonah Field and Pinedale Anticline in western Wyoming became some of the largest natural gas fields in the United States. The development of hydraulic fracturing technology in the 21st century further expanded Wyoming's natural gas production. Uranium mining began in the 1950s, making Wyoming a crucial supplier during the Cold War nuclear arms race. Though uranium mining declined after the 1980s, Wyoming still contains significant uranium reserves. The energy industry brought prosperity, but also environmental challenges and economic volatility. Boom and bust cycles became a defining characteristic of Wyoming's economy, with communities rapidly expanding during energy booms only to contract painfully when prices fell. Part 11. Conservation and Tourism. While Wyoming developed its energy resources, it also became a leader in conservation. Yellowstone National Park, established in 1872, was the world's first national park. Though primarily located in Wyoming, the park's creation predated Wyoming statehood and was initially managed as a federal preserve. Grand Teton National Park, established in 1929 and expanded in 1950, protected one of the most stunning mountain landscapes in America. The creation of the park was controversial, with local ranchers opposing the loss of grazing lands. John D. Rockefeller Jr. secretly purchased over 35,000 acres of land in Jackson Hole, eventually donating it to expand the park, a move that generated significant local opposition but ultimately preserved the area for future generations. Devil's Tower, rising dramatically from the plains of northeastern Wyoming, became America's first national monument in 1906, designated by President Theodore Roosevelt. This sacred site to many Native American tribes also became a mecca for rock climbers from around the world. The National Elk Refuge in Jackson Hole, established in 1912, protects the winter habitat of the largest elk herd in North America. The refuge represents an early recognition of the need to preserve wildlife habitat in the face of human development. Tourism grew from a minor industry to one of Wyoming's economic pillars. Jackson Hole transformed from an isolated valley to a world-renowned destination for skiing, with resorts like Jackson Hole Mountain Resort attracting visitors from around the globe. The town of Jackson, with its iconic antler arches in the town square, became a symbol of the New West, blending authentic Western heritage with modern amenities. Dude ranches, offering city dwellers a taste of cowboy life, proliferated across the state. These ranches helped preserve Wyoming's ranching heritage while adapting to economic realities. The Eaton Ranch, established in 1879 near Sheridan, claims to be the world's first dude ranch. The tension between conservation and development remains central to Wyoming's identity. The state has fought federal environmental regulations while simultaneously depending on the pristine landscapes that attract millions of visitors annually. This paradox reflects Wyoming's broader struggle to balance its traditional extractive industries with environmental preservation. Part 12. Modern Wyoming, Politics and Culture. Wyoming in the 21st century remains the least populous state, with just under 600,000 residents. This small population spread across nearly 100,000 square miles, creates unique challenges and opportunities. Wyoming has no personal or corporate income tax, funding government primarily through mineral severance taxes and sales taxes. Politically, Wyoming has become one of the most reliably Republican states, though its political history is more complex. The state elected Democrat Nellie Taylor Ross as the nation's first female governor in 1924, following her husband's death in office. Democrat Gail McGee served in the U.S. Senate from 1959 to 1977, and Democrat Edgar Hirschler served 3 terms as governor from 1975 to 1987. The state's political philosophy emphasizes individual liberty, limited government, and local control. This libertarian streak manifests in various ways, from strong support for gun rights to resistance to federal land management policies. With the federal government owning about 48% of Wyoming's land, conflicts over land use remain contentious. Wyoming's congressional delegation, despite representing the smallest population, has often wielded significant influence. Senator Malcolm Wallop championed the Strategic Defense Initiative in the 1980s. Senator Alan Simpson became a national figure as Senate Republican whip. Currently, the Cheney family has been prominent, with Dick Cheney serving as vice president and his daughter Liz Cheney representing Wyoming in Congress before her defeat in 2022 following her criticism of President Trump. Culturally, Wyoming maintains strong connections to its Western heritage. Cheyenne Frontier Days, started in 1897, has grown into one of the world's largest rodeos, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors each July. The event embodies Wyoming's effort to preserve and celebrate its cowboy culture while adapting to modern times. Part 13: Contemporary Challenges and Opportunities. Today's Wyoming faces significant challenges. The boom-bust cycle of energy prices continues to impact communities. The decline of coal as utilities shift to natural gas and renewables has hit traditional coal communities hard. Gillette and Rock Springs have experienced population declines and economic hardship as mines close or reduce operations. Wyoming has responded by attempting to diversify its economy. The technology sector, though small, is growing, with companies attracted by Wyoming's low taxes and high quality of life. The blockchain and cryptocurrency industries have found a welcoming regulatory environment in Wyoming, which passed some of the nation's most crypto-friendly laws. Wind energy has emerged as a new frontier. Wyoming's consistent winds and vast open spaces make it ideal for wind farms. Major projects like the Chokecherry and Sierra Madre Wind Energy Project could make Wyoming a major exporter of renewable energy, though transmission infrastructure remains a challenge. Education presents both challenges and opportunities. The University of Wyoming, the state's only 4-year public university, serves as the center of higher education and research. Wyoming spends more per pupil on K-12 education than most states, funded largely by mineral revenues, but struggles to retain young people who often leave for opportunities elsewhere. The COVID-19 pandemic affected Wyoming like everywhere else, but the state's rural nature and outdoor lifestyle helped minimize some impacts. The pandemic also accelerated remote work trends, with some professionals relocating to Wyoming for its natural beauty and lower cost of living, particularly in areas like Jackson Hole and Sheridan. Conclusion: the enduring spirit of Wyoming. As we conclude this journey through Wyoming's history, we see a state shaped by extremes, vast distances, harsh weather, boom and bust economies, and a tiny population governing an enormous land. Yet these challenges have forged a distinctive character, independent, resilient, and proud. Wyoming's contributions to America far exceed what might be expected from its small population. It was first to grant women the vote, establishing a precedent that would eventually spread nationwide. It preserved Yellowstone and Grand Teton for the world. It has powered America's growth with its energy resources. It has kept alive the mythology and reality of the American West. The tensions that have defined Wyoming throughout its history persist. How to balance energy development with environmental conservation, how to preserve traditional ways of life while adapting to economic realities, how to maintain local control while dealing with federal land ownership, how to honor Native American heritage while celebrating pioneer history. These questions have no easy answers, and Wyoming continues to grapple with them. Looking forward, Wyoming faces an uncertain but not unpromising future. Climate change may alter its landscapes and economy. Technology may offer new opportunities for economic diversification. The state's vast open spaces and natural beauty will likely become increasingly valuable as the world becomes more crowded and developed. What seems certain is that Wyoming will face these challenges as it always has, with fierce independence, stubborn determination, and an unshakable belief in its own way of doing things. The state motto, equal rights, speaks not just to gender equality, but to a broader principle that has guided Wyoming since its beginning: the belief that in this vast, challenging landscape, everyone must be given an equal chance to succeed or fail on their own merits. Wyoming remains a place where the past is very much present, where you can stand on the Oregon trail ruts, see the names carved in Independence Rock, watch wild horses run across the red desert, or witness the same geothermal wonders that amazed John Coulter. It's a place where ranchers still drive cattle across lands their families have worked for generations, where the wind carries both the promise of new energy and echoes of ancient songs, where the smallest population maintains one of the largest spirits. This is Wyoming, forever Western, forever wild, forever free. Its history is not just a chronicle of events, but a testament to the human capacity to endure, adapt, and thrive in one of Earth's most challenging environments. As Wyoming moves into its future, it carries with it the lessons of its past, that independence has a price worth paying, that the land must be both used and preserved, and that in the vast spaces between its scattered towns lies not emptiness, but possibility. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Wyoming's remarkable history. From ancient seas to modern energy fields, from Native American societies to the digital age, Wyoming's story continues to unfold across its wide open spaces, under its endless sky, in the hearts of its people who call this magnificent, demanding land home.